Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I'm your host, Kate Mollison. This week, we are here with a very dear friend of mine and a repeat podcast offender, Dave Roberts. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome, Kate.
So, Dave, for those who are unfamiliar with us, you and I have a storied relationship that developed rapidly over the last year, but I feel like I've known you a lifetime. You were a speaker at my conference last year. But why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about you and what brings you into the conversation today?
Well, thank you, Kate. And how we met is probably one for another episode in terms of how we connected with each other, which was through pure serendipity.
I think we talked about that on the last episode in season 1. So for anyone super curious, go back and listen to season 1.
Yes, go back and listen to season 1 and listen to every episode in season 1 of Kate's podcast. So,
You're too kind.
Anyway, I am 69, soon to be 70 years old, and the scheme of things, I've lived a lot of life in those years, a lot of ups and downs. My life started out pretty routinely. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology from Utica University, what was then Utica College, it's now Utica University, in 1977. Following graduation, a couple years after that, I began working. I began working in the human service field. The highlight of my human service career was being an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor for 27 years for a state-run facility, in New York.
Wow.
I worked with many different individuals with addiction challenges and mental health challenges combined. And I look at the individuals with substance use disorders and mental health issues and being among my greatest teachers. I retired from the state of New York in 2012, and I began to embark on a career of teaching. I started teaching at Utica University in 2003.
Comes full circle.
Comes full circle, yeah. Started teaching there in 2003. I've been there ever since. I've taught a variety of different courses for the psychology department and the psychology child life department. I currently teach for psych child life and for health studies. Among the courses I teach are impact of addiction in children and families, care of the human spirit, and death, dying, and bereavement. Now, I'm sure your viewers or listeners are wondering, well, how could somebody from addiction, how did he take such a U-turn and start becoming involved in all studies thanatology, all information thanatology? Well, I think, Kate, as you know, I don't think anybody decides that they're going to study death due to professional choice. I never woke up and said, I want to study death today, because like everybody else in the society, I thought death was kind of a taboo topic, and I had some difficulties really talking about it. And it was never part of my vocabulary anyway. I was too busy looking to make my mark in the addiction field, looking to, provide for my family. But, the universe has a strange way of getting you to look at what you need to look at. And in 2001, my only daughter, and I have two wonderful sons, Janine, came to my house. She was living outside of the home with her boyfriend at the time. She came in, said they needed to talk to us, and she immediately advised me before the door closed that she was pregnant.
Mm,
And, I didn't blow my top. I didn't get angry. I really had a lot of respect for her significant other. I liked him. I just wanted to make sure they had a plan. The only thing I said is I wish you could have waited a little longer.
mm,
So fast forward to May 2nd, 2002, she delivers a beautiful baby girl by the name of Brianna. So
mm,
on May 2nd, I am like on cloud nine, celebrating being a grandfather for the first time.
mm,
In between all of this, however, early in her pregnancy, she injured her right foot, and her
mm.
right foot never responded to traditional treatment to deal with a swollen foot. It didn't respond to foot elevation, rest, nothing. They finally did an MRI, and they wanted to do an MRI actually in April of 2002. My daughter Janine said, no, I want to wait till after the baby's born. So they did an MRI as soon as Brianna was born. They found an undefined 8 centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. And they biopsied it. And on May 19th, and I remember this because my wife called me at work, they said that the tumor that they biopsied was highly suggestive of cancer. On
Wow.
May 26th, she was diagnosed with cancer. And we went to Dana-Farber in Boston because the type of cancer she had was a sarcoma, and a very rare and aggressive type of sarcoma. And
Mm,
Dana-Farber and Sloan Kettering are two of the best research hospitals for sarcomas and treatment hospitals in the country and perhaps even the world.
mm,
Um, but on June 2nd, and I remember these dates, Kate, as if they happened yesterday, on June 2nd of 2002, we were told in a 5-minute consult by her oncologist that Janine had a stage 4 tumor that with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. Um, there was no cure for the cancer that she had. The only hope that we were going to have is aggressive chemotherapy to put it in remission.
mm.
What I heard, and and what my daughter heard, is that unless there's a miracle, your daughter's going to die, and that's what we both heard.
Wow.
So these 3 dates, and I use these as kind of the centerpiece of my story. May 2nd, I'm celebrating the joy of being a grandfather. Now, May 19th, I got word that I had completed the requirements for my master's in social work degree in, SUNY Albany. And then May 26th, I find out that I have a daughter with a terminal illness.
Mm.
And on
Quite the
June
roller
2nd,
coaster.
oh yeah, and June 2nd, that gets confirmed. So within a month, I use those dates to tell individuals that life can turn on a dime. Don't take
Mm.
any day for granted because you don't know what's going to happen the next day. So
Amen
I
to
was,
that.
oh
Say that
yeah,
louder for the people in the back.
yeah, for the, you could, and so I was thrown into the role of being a caregiver. I went to my boss and said, look, I'm out of here.
Mm,
I can't work. I can't work under the circumstances. At the time, I was also seeing a psychiatrist a rare form of psychiatrist who didn't believe in medication first. He believed in therapy first
mhm,
because I had some unresolved grief issues come up with as a result of my mother's, and I call it transition to a new existence, and my supervisor and mentor's transition to a new existence. Two very pivotal figures in my life. And this came
mm,
up when I was doing field placement at a skilled nursing facility where you're confronted with end of life issues just about every day.
mm,
Um, so when I told him about my daughter, he looked at me and he goes, David, our focus has now shifted to more practical matters. He wrote a letter to my boss saying that under the circumstances he's unable to work. He gave me a diagnosis of adjustment disorder, based on the sudden changes in my household,
wow.
and I was able to stay out of work with pay for 3 months.
That's
That,
amazing.
yep. I went back to work when she was feeling, when the chemo was having a positive effect. I went back to work. But in January of 2003, after 6 rounds of chemotherapy, it only put her cancer to 80% remission. In January, the cancer remetastasized with a vengeance. And on
Mm,
March 1st, 2003, Janine transitioned to a new existence at home. and we had hospice services at home. So
Mm.
that's kind of a very encapsulated version of my kind of from when I started working until the time of Janine's illness and her death. And after that, it's been a path of ups and downs, but mostly now with self-discovery, learning to embrace different perspectives, and overall, Kate, just having peace with where I'm at this point, being grateful for what I have going in my life and for the people that I have in my life.
Mm. Thank you for sharing all of that with me. It is so much to take in over such a short, like you gave us just tip of the iceberg, but really took us along for what an incredible emotional roller coaster that must have been. And I think about some of your background and some of your training and doing, with drug addiction and that type of work, there's grief associated with that, even if we don't realize it, at the surface. But some of those
Yeah.
behavioral reactions and maladaptive coping strategies that create addictive behaviors stem from grief.
Yeah.
And taking that learning of behavioral modification and taking your academia, was that helpful to you at all going through the process, having that background, having that training, so to speak?
Yeah, and I've been asked this question, and I so many times, and I think the easy assumption to make was that it did help me. That would be the assumption I think a lot of people would say is that, yeah, my training, my background, doing trauma-informed therapy with substance users, whether the trauma was related to the addiction or it was family trauma that contributed to the addiction all this helped me. Let me tell you, Kate, all of my training wasn't worth a shit. To be quite frank with you, and I'm not putting this very bluntly. All the
No, and I
training,
appreciate that. I think people need to hear it like off the cuff.
yeah, all the training in the world, all the education that I had, all the experience that I had didn't even prepare me to walk the path of a parent who experienced the death of a child.
Mm,
Because in the scheme of things, in an orderly universe where the laws are very kind of predictable, parent is not supposed to bury a child. Parent
mm,
is not supposed to carry the legacy of their child until that parent dies. It's the other way around.
hmm
So I was thrust into a world at the age of 47 where my version of a midlife crisis was trying to figure out who the hell am I now that
mm,
my daughter is no longer a part of this world. It wasn't the typical, the stereotypical male midlife crisis where I get a hairpiece, buy a sports car, and try to pick up, a woman 30 years younger than me. You know, that my midlife crisis was discovering who am I
Your
and do I
midlife
want,
crisis was, in fact, a crisis
uh-huh. It was a
and not
crisis of,
self-inflicted. This was an actual legitimate crisis. And I think that that's the difference.
it was a crisis of identity, Kate.
Mm,
That's what it was because um, all the beliefs, all the values, all the priorities that I had established for myself that kept my world orderly and predictable now had to be all had to be looked at.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
it's the gift of perspective that I like to say, a little tongue in cheek. Craig gave me that similar, if I'm not Mrs. Mollison, then who am I? And it's that
mhm.
complete just upheaval of everything you know. And
Yeah.
I know for me going through it, part of what helped me was doing research, trying to understand why my brain is doing this. Why am I acting this way? Because it helped me put my hands on what was happening.
Hmm.
So if I look at the opposite side of the coin for you, right? So the training didn't help in the experience of the loss with your daughter, but do you think that the loss of Janine helped in your teaching ability or teachings as you shifted into the focus of that knowledge?
Oh, absolutely. Because what happened is, and I know we've talked about this before. I've always been very science based,
Mm,
where I used to believe that we could only understand behavior through the lens of science. That if I couldn't see it, if I couldn't experience it with the remainder of my senses, that behavior didn't exist. I thought
mm.
science was the explanation for everything. But for me, and I think for others that I've talked to, and if you're going to get through a catastrophic event, particularly a life altering event or an event that defies the natural order of the universe, it's imperative to use critical thinking to embrace different perspectives that are going to allow you to get through the tragedy.
That
Okay.
sounds counterintuitive. How do you mean?
Well, forward a little bit to 7 years following my daughter's transition. We're going to go to
Mm,
2010 now. I was one of the organizers for a conference by the name of Beyond Words, Creative Approaches to Grief. And I know you're familiar with upstate New York, how
mhm.
beautiful it gets in the fall and September with the change of colors in
Gorgeous.
the
Oh, I love it.
Adirondacks.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it looks like an oil painting.
It does.
So I took three presenters up to Old Forge. Me and my wife Sherry took three of the presenters up to Old Forge, so in the Adirondacks, so they could see the change of season. They were having this intense that conversation about spirituality, particularly life, the afterlife, survival of consciousness after death, you name it.
Mm,
So I'm sitting there, Kate, and I'm driving, and all of a sudden, I look up to the sky, state in to nobody in particular, maybe God, the universe, whoever was listening, saying that I want to be where they are, which meant that I wanted to have more of an like increased knowledge of spirituality to get me through the next step. Now, in 7 years, I was doing, I think, what was typically expected of a bereaved parent to work
mm,
through grief. I was going to support groups. I was reading books and memoirs of other parents who were farther along in the journey. And as a combination of both of those, with both of those resources, I was trying to figure out, okay, what did they do that's going to help me get to the next step? I started to do some writing for a couple of online journals. I started doing presentations, all in honor of my daughter's legacy. So I
mm,
was doing what I needed to do, but at that moment when literally shouted that intention to the universe,
hmm,
my soul was looking for something that my mind and my brain couldn't comprehend, but it was missing something. Now, prior to that, I had gotten a call through pure serendipity. I met an interfaith minister by the name of Patty Farina.
mm.
I would not have met her had her computer not crashed when she was trying to register for the conference. She was registering. This was August 25th. She was registering for the conference. Double checked her workshops. Double checked her credit card information. The computer went blank. She called me because I was a contact number. So we talked for about 45 minutes.
Hmm.
And we exchanged stories. She was a volunteer for the Angel of Hope statue in Long Island, and the Angel of Hope is a statue that is erected in honor of children who have died, and she was
Mm,
working with the parents of those children. So um, I told her after the conference and she also asked me. She goes, "Do you believe in signs?" And I said, "You know, Patty, I really don't buy into that because I'm kind of like science based."
yep.
But I said, I think my daughter sent me a double rainbow on
Mm,
Father's Day, and she did. But there were other things that were happening, and for time's sake, I'll try to give you the condensed version. But there were other things that were
mhm,
happening. I was seeing butterflies. I was hearing a song on the radio, and I was thinking of my daughter, and I'm thinking, well, is there a connection to this? I
mm.
think there is. I had read about similar connections, but I didn't know how to integrate that with my science-based background.
Right.
So I meet Patty at the conference, give her that hug. She gives me a hug and she goes, I think your daughter sent me a rainbow. So I'm thinking, at the
Mm.
end of the conference, Kate, well, and you know what it was like planning the conference last year. I was just fatigued. I was
Oh,
tired.
yeah.
I was drained, and I'm thinking, great, another person with a sign for me. Um, and then she told me, she goes, if you ever want to come to Long Island, you can stay at my house with me and my husband, and I'll show you my Long Island. So in
Mm,
November, there was a workshop called Embracing the Power of Change. After some deliberation, after I called her and said, I'd like to come up. I asked her about hotels and transportation. She goes, don't worry about that. You can stay with me and my husband. And I wanted to make sure her husband was okay with it, which obviously it turned out he was, but I was quite concerned
hmm.
about that, in the beginning. Um, so we went to the conference, to the workshop. She came back and from there, she facilitated a spiritually transformative experience that not only allowed me to find peace with my daughter's passing, but or transition, but convinced me that our consciousness survives after death, our spirits survive after death, and we can learn to transform the relationship by developing continued bonds with the spirits of our loved ones. And that helps us integrate grief and move through grief. And a lot of people, I mean, one of the questions I was asked, well, did you believe what was happening? And I absolutely did, because
Mm,
Kate, what was happening was not only what I asked for, but exceeded what I asked for. And there's a saying, I think, by Paulo Coelho from The Alchemist, that
mm,
when you do want something or desire something, the universe will conspire to see that you get it. And that's paraphrasing it.
hmm.
So my intention was a form of prayer that translated into the universe opening up this path for me. And from there, it led to me and Patty having marathon discussions about all things psychology, all things spiritual. And she introduced me gradually to different perspectives, one being Native American teachings of animals and nature. We talked about Carl Jung's work with the shadow element. We talked about
Mm.
Brian Weiss's work with past life regression therapy, near-death experiences. We talked about everything for marathon conversations. And every time she would give me something to take a look at, I would look at it and I'd say, boy, this is pretty cool. And I'd call her back and say, I can see where this aligns, where I can integrate this into my own philosophy. And so the thing that she taught me, she goes, there's always going to be a place for your core beliefs, but you can add beliefs not instead of your core beliefs, but in addition to. So that's
Mm.
the process of critical thinking and belief expansion and perspective shifting, which I believe is so important to get through any type of life challenge. I tell individuals, I'm not, if you try to use the same materials to rebuild the foundation of a house that you built that foundation 20 years ago, and you try to use the same materials, those materials are outdated, that foundation's going to crack. So
Mm.
you have to use materials that are more updated to meet the demands of putting together a foundation 20 years later. It's the same with, had I had stayed very rigid in my beliefs about science, and I had not been willing to open up different perspectives or realize that the way that I was thinking was not going to serve me well or help me find peace in the long term, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today.
Wow. Like, what a gift of information that you just gave. It's that literal how to hack your brain into expanding your thought process, like
Yep.
how to apply critical thinking in order to obtain a deeper connectedness. Like,
Yep.
wow. And I
Yep.
think so for me, it really came down to the crux of a decision. Like, it was, I don't even know what the variables in the equation were, but it got to a point where I was like, all right, cut the bullshit, Kate. You need to stop ruminating. Doesn't mean we're not sad, but it means that we have to move. We have to move. We have to put
Mhm.
one foot in front of the other. And this was after the things that had to be done. Because in my situation, there was so much subsequent trauma that I was
Yep.
putting out fires for. That was stuff that couldn't wait and had nothing to do with grief or not grief. That was just survival. But beyond that, like pushing myself, even now, I find times where I struggle to talk on the phone to people and be connected to people because it's such a trauma triggering thing. But in order to apply like critical thinking and that rationale to the subjective, to the emotional, is such a powerhouse piece of information. So, how do you make that decision, right? How do you wrap your head around what's happening when it is so non textbook?
Well, what happened to me was non-textbook. I mean, losing a child. I mean, the textbooks I've read never had an answer for that in terms of college textbooks. They actually devoted very little space to that. Um, and but essentially, it was putting myself around individuals who, and prior to Patty, there were other individuals. I mentioned that the three speakers that I had that had certainly different perspectives on a lot of different things. Um, and I began to listen to them and began to consider some of the possibilities. But it was my willingness to just simply be open and just listen to different perspectives and from because and then when I stated my intention to the universe that I wanted to be where those they were, that told me again that I was missing something. So
Mm.
I was ready. And there's always a pivotal point, I think, in anybody's grief journey where you make a decision to either shit or get off the pot, so to
Yeah.
speak. You do that. It's just like, am I going to re-engage in life or am I going to stay stuck? And it
Yeah.
came to a point where, and I had made that decision probably 3 years in where I wanted to move forward. But moving from that decision to re-engage in life and finding peace is not necessarily a linear path. That there's a lot of ups and downs with that.
Sure.
And but I had wanted to do that, and gradually resources kind of manifested for me that helped me get to the next step. And then when I met Patty, that was like the cherry on top of the best chocolate sundae that you ever had with whipped cream.
Mm.
And that just opened up a whole new perspective. And now I'm a firm believer that psychology and spirituality and science can merge together quite nicely to help not individuals only transcend challenges, but also to improve physical and mental health outcomes. And the research shows that many spiritual and complementary practices do improve physical and mental health outcomes. And in some cases may be protective against certain types of mental illness, particularly depression.
Interesting. I love that science backs the importance of spiritual connectedness.
hmm So,
And
but
so
but
for,
but to
yeah, go
embrace a
ahead.
different perspective, you have to be willing to be open to experiencing schools of thought that are contradictory to your own core beliefs, and you have to be willing to say, okay, empower yourself to say what resonates. What part of this perspective can I take? Which part can I leave alone? And you can pick and choose because there's such a menu of holistic practices that you can choose from. You can just pick what's suited for you and what is going to align with your belief system, and that's not supplant your core beliefs, but in addition to.
Because it's about creating a space of feeling safe, of feeling loved, of feeling secure. That's what spirituality does, is it creates that sense of security and connectedness. And if you can a la carte it, so to speak, you really
Mhm.
can tailor make your own, it's like going to build a bear, right? We're going to build a
Yeah.
bear our own psychology, and that is blended with spirituality or vice versa, however you want to phrase it. I love
And
that.
yeah, and to do that, and I'm going to quote from a book that I just read called Into the Soul of the World by Brad
Mm,
Wetzler, and I'm going to paraphrase this. He said, and this is, I think, in terms of either embracing spirituality or personal growth, he said something to the effect that you have to trust yourself, you have to trust others, and you have to trust in something greater than yourself. And if
mm,
and if we can do all of that, trust in something greater than ourselves, which could mean not only a group or support group or a higher power, but trusting that we can integrate other perspectives with our core beliefs and that we can empower ourselves to do that. That's where the other trust comes in. It's breaking through that fear of breaking the status quo.
mm.
Because as George Carlin used to say, the status quo sucks. And and in this case, when you're dealing with catastrophic loss, the status quo is not going to get you where you need to go.
It's the Mel Roberts let them theory, right? Like I recently read
hmm
that book, and it's very much that people are going to say that you're doing it wrong, or that you're doing it too fast or not fast enough, or people are going to say that stuff anyway, so let them. Just do
Yeah.
your own stuff, what resonates with you. So if
Yeah.
someone makes the decision, right, like we've made the decision to alchemize our grief, to move forward, to make sense of it all, to open our mind, where do we start? Right? Like, is it, in your opinion, better to start with the science, with the theory, and then ground it in spirituality? Or is it better to start with something a little bit, more conceptually fluid?
It's whatever's going to work for that individual. And that's what I tell individuals. Whenever I introduce them to new perspectives, and I'll do that at a time when I think they're ready for a new perspective. And that's where
Mm,
active listening comes in, where you're doing bereavement support or counseling around grief. is you really need to be cued into both verbal and nonverbal cues about when they may be ready for a new perspective.
Mm,
Um, so for me, it's like wherever they're comfortable starting. I'll give you if they want to start with the science, they want to start with spirituality, they want to see how the spirituality fits with the science or the science fits with the spirituality. Whatever is going to make sense for them to synthesize those beliefs and understand those perspectives is what works for them. Like my students will ask me about papers, particularly if they're not APA formatted papers. Well, do you want me to answer it in narrative form? Or can I copy and paste each question and do it in paragraph form? I say, yeah, either or. It's whatever is going to help you learn the best is what you do.
mm.
So everybody is different. We all know that. Everybody processes grief individually. So we need to let them process new information based on their based on the individual differences that we see among individuals. Some people will process it visually, through our, creatively, artistically. Some will listen to audio tapes. Some will be drawn to a particular religion. Some will be drawn to a particular spirituality practice, or somebody will be drawn to another practice. And there's nothing right or wrong with it. It's just what resonates, and how that person best processes it is how I encourage them to synthesize new information.
I love that. And I know that they also could read your book about blending spirituality and psychology. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and where listeners can find it?
Well, here we go. The book itself it was written, co-authored by me and Patty Farina. I'll hold it up for everybody. It's When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. We self-published in 2021 through Amazon KDP. The book pretty much goes into in detail the spiritually transformative experience that Patty facilitated. We give a sampling of our conversations that show how psychology and spirituality can merge to help individuals transcend challenge, and the
Mm,
importance of critical thinking for present and future generations to expand personal growth and to transcend challenge. And also, the readers will see in the book, if they choose to read it, how the work that I did with Janine also translated doing ancestral healing around my father's decision to leave my mother and me when I was 5 years old, and my
wow.
mother's decision to overprotect the shit out of me, to the point where I was felt suffocated after he left.
Mm,
And the work that I did with Janine and with other spiritual healers, and Patty's another one that will tell you have more than one spiritual teacher, have a variety. And the one
hmm.
spiritual teacher that I have helped me in a session see the connection between my mother's decision to overprotect me and why she did that, and also understanding the history of my father through a relative that I discovered through pure serendipity helped me understand that he couldn't live in a traditional marriage, not based on his history. And as you know,
Mm,
with generational trauma, our histories are inextricably woven into our DNAs. If that history isn't changed, we carry that history with us for generation to generation. He couldn't,
hmm.
he did not have the resources to change his history. He could not run his history. His history is who he was, and that's how he responded. He could not respond in a tradition. He couldn't stay in a traditional marriage, but it didn't mean he didn't love me any less. I learned that he
Mm,
probably loved me more and that was the reason that he left, because he didn't want to interfere with any growth or cause any more pain to me and my mother. But it took me about 55 years after he left to figure that out. But with that,
mm.
but with the help of Patty and other spiritual teachers, that was something that, and who would have thought I would have been able to come to peace with my mother's and father's decisions long after they had transitioned. But
Wow.
that's also the benefit of embracing other types of perspectives, and particularly spiritual and metaphysical perspectives, is it can promote that kind of healing where traditional therapy by itself may not be able to.
I love it. It's like an expansion pack for your video game,
Uh-huh.
right? Like
Pretty
here's your
much,
cheat
yeah.
codes.
Yep. Here's the key codes. Now, let's take a little bit of Buddhism. Let's take a little bit of sound therapy. Yeah, I can use this. Yeah, depending on
I
the
love it.
situation.
So we are just about at the end of our time together today, but I do want to invite you to answer the same question that I've been asking all of my guests. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's listening who's grieving, what would you say?
Wow. The thing is, I never give advice because there's a story with advice. I'll say this. I tell my students I never give advice to anybody because if somebody follows my advice and they do well, they think it was my advice that did it. They don't give themselves any credit for it. If
Mm,
they if they take my advice and it fails, then they have me to blame. So I make suggestions, but let's put it this way. I'll give individuals a couple of suggestions. One is be gentle with yourself, especially in early grief and throughout. You did nothing to contribute to the death of your loved one. You could not have seen what could have happened. You did the
mm,
best that you could given the circumstances that were. So be sit with that, but then let it go and show yourself some grace and be kind to yourself. And the advice that Patty and I give individuals, determine what you believe, and don't be afraid to embrace perspectives that are going to enhance your understanding of the world and help you find peace. The perspective shift and embracing different ideas or in entertaining different ideas is important if we're going to live and re-engage in a world that is now different. The same rules that we lived under before no longer apply.
mm,
Loss changes the landscape of our lives, and we need to be able to redo the landscape to to reflect those changes, and we can learn to find peace with that as well.
mm.
So.
Dear friend of mine once said that when you experience grief, the laws of physics no longer apply to you.
Mhm.
And so once you understand that and accept that you get to move in a way that no one else does because you have that perspective, you have that capacity of expanded understanding, you get to
Mhm.
write your own rules. You really do get to author your own existence in a way that you never have before. And it is liberating when you find that.
Yep.
Mm.
And just there does not have to be a scientific explanation for everything either. This thought came to my head. If somebody tells you that they got a sign from their loved one, it's not you to judge whether or not it's real. It's real to them. It's your job to understand the significance of it and what it did to help them. Um,
Mm.
and sometimes it's just about beholding the magic in the universe that does not need any explanation. It's just we know it to be real,
The
but
Santa
there's
Claus
not.
effect, as I like to call it.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's just behold the magic of the universe, be gentle with yourself, and don't be afraid to go outside of your comfort zone to embrace different perspectives that are going to help you find peace.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for having such a great conversation with me today. I really am excited about this. I think the listeners are going to enjoy it.
I
So,
hope so. It's always great when we get together and talk.
yeah, I'm always enlightened by you. So we'll have to see if there's more opportunity for us to connect again in the future.
Oh, I think
With
there will be.
with that, we are at the end of our time. This has been the Happily Never After show. Thanks so much for joining us. I encourage you to go back and listen to all of our previous episodes, both here in season 2 and in season 1. I'm your host, Kate Mollison. Until next time.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.